link the topic A to topic B, lead into it if you can. Now, if you are using multiple speakers, I also recommend you use this transition. So if you have one person, say you have 7 people doing this presentation for your business school class. You want to explain why you're transitioning from one person to the next. So I talked to you about finance. I'm going to pass it on to Josh, who's going to talk about marketing. At the very least, just label that you're transitioning. Don't just give them the clicker and say, or not even say anything. You may have seen presentations like that. You just stop talking and pass the clicker. And everybody's like, that looks weird. Even better if you can link what you're talking about to what Josh is going to talk about. Even better if you can spur some excitement about what you've done and how the next step is going to be related to that. So, multiple speakers, I recommend using this strategy as well. All right, the next topic is related to transitions, but it's a little bit of PowerPoint design as well. It involves a concept of using trackers to help your audience understand as you transition through different material. A tracker is a visual cue of where you are in your presentation, such as something like this. You might have at the top of your PowerPoint slide a visual cue such as this that has potential profit, cost, and compliance. And the middle one, cost, is highlighted. So your audience knows that this slide is about cost, and you've just finished talking about potential profit, and you're going to be talking about compliance. Really effective way to keep your audience with you. Let me show you a few slides examples here. So we're back to our Small Business Administration, some 504 loan program. Here, you can look up at the tracker and you can see we're talking about the potential profit for this opportunity. So anything I talk about, you know is related to potential profit. I move on. Now I'm talking about cost. Now this might be confusing. There might be a bunch of complex data I'm going to throw at you, but you have this cue that it's all related to cost. It's not related to profit. It's related to the cost. This is similar to a number of the techniques I suggested with your written essay. I suggested you use all sorts of things: thesis, subheading, topic sentences, all things to guide your audience so that you can get complex with your presentation without confusing them. This tracker is another tool just like that. It allows you to get complex and not lose your audience. Now let's talk about compliance. All right, compliance is a big issue. It gets confusing. But you know, everything under here relates to compliance, and you've got a nice little checklist. Think about how it fits in. Trackers are great. They take some effort to make on the PowerPoint, but it can really distinguish you. Okay, any questions about trackers? Any questions about transitions? Let's move on to visual aids. So as you're transitioning through, you might talk about or use various visual aids to make your point, make your conclusion. We're going to talk about the 4 main types of visual aids you will use: tables, pie charts, bar charts, and line graphs. Let's first talk about when you might use each of them, and then we'll talk about some ways to present them. I'll tell you what I'm going for here, this first one, or I'll take the first one. If you're using a table, if you use a table in a technical presentation, you will probably use it just to present numbers. A table doesn't show trends, it doesn't show relative size, it just shows numbers. So if for whatever reason you just need to get the numbers out there, you would probably use a table. Now, if you were to use a pie chart, it would show something different. It might show a trend, it might show relative size. Let me ask you, what is the advantage of using a pie chart? What point might you be trying to make if you're using a pie chart? Now,
Proportion?
yeah, proportion to a whole. That's the main reason to use a pie chart. How about a bar chart? Why might you use a bar chart? Sure.
Comparison, comparing like 2 years.
Yeah, visually, bar charts help us with comparisons. And line graphs, when might we use a line graph? Right.
To show the trend.
Trends over time. Yeah, these are the main things you will do as a business presenter. Use these 4 types to serve these purposes. Look at a couple examples. This is a table. Like I said, a table doesn't show trends, doesn't show comparisons, it just shows numbers. So for whatever reason you need to show numbers, you might use a table like this. There are a couple things that this table does to make it a little bit easier on the audience. You can see the headings at the top and the years along the side are in a slightly different color. Visually makes it easier for your audience. And you can also see that every other line has a slightly different shade. Is another thing that just makes it easier on your audience. Still doesn't show trends, but it makes it a little bit easier for your audience to read. Look at another example of a visual aid. Take a look at this visual aid. Tell me what I'm trying to communicate with this. What is the story of this graph? Yeah?
The first quarter is the biggest sales quarter.
Yeah, this is what I'm trying to tell you by choosing this graph. The biggest quarter is the biggest part of our sales, and in fact, it's more than half of our sales. Now, if you look closely at this graph, there are a couple other stories going on with this data. A couple other things that I could have accented if I had chosen to do so. What else is going on with this data?
The sales are declining gradually.
Yeah, sales are declining gradually. It's not completely apparent with this graph. What type of graph would I have used, visual aid would I have used if I wanted to show declining sales?
Line graph.
Line graph. Yes, absolutely. What else? Any other story going on here?
Bar.
Is there?
The
Second.
first quarter has more than 50% of the sales.
Okay. I think this is the way, if that's what I want you to focus on, this is the graph that I want to choose.
Yeah.
And I think that shows that very well.
One question when I'm having a graph of this sort, like I'm trying to understand the pattern or format, should I have analysis also beneath that, or should I talk about the analysis?
I would recommend you talk about the analysis.
Okay, no line, nothing to write.
Well, let's talk about that in a minute. I'm going to go over a technique I like to use for presenting a graph, and we'll see where that might fit in. It is possible you could have some analysis.
Yeah.
Generally, I would say no.
Okay.
Or if you do, there's some ways we can make it clear. Yeah,
What kind of, do you put the percentage on the side to show?
you could. You could. In this graph, I chose not to, but I still think I think it even more effectively shows this particular point without the percentages. Just by looking at the pie, you see, wow, more than half of the pie in the first quarter. That's all I'm saying with this graph. If I was giving you numbers, I would be trying to say something slightly different. Okay, so back to other stories that this data might be telling. Jing Nao said that there is a declining amount of sales. There's declining sales over time. Is there anything else? How about the size of quarter 2? You notice that's pretty big. It's bigger than 3 and 4, and if you look closely, you can see that it is bigger than 3 or 4 combined. But it doesn't really jump out at you. Suppose I wanted to focus on quarter 2. I wanted to say, everyone knows that quarter 1 is our primary sales season, but what we often forget is how important quarter 2 is. It's twice as big as quarter 3 or quarter 4. So let's concentrate on ramping up our capabilities for that time of year. If I wanted to tell you that story, what type of graph might I use?
Bar.
I think a bar graph. Yeah, Priya, comment?
But actually, if you put the percentages in there, you can still make the case.
Okay.
But as you can see from the numbers here, putting these two together, it's still, you know, the second quarter is much higher than that.
Okay, so to Priya's point, you could put the numbers in.
Yeah, like
Let's-
you said.
Let's take a look at this. So if I wanted to focus on the second quarter, I feel like this would be a fast, effective way to do it. You could just look at the bar graph and you could see, wow, this is actually 3 times as big as the third quarter, more than 3 times as big as the fourth quarter. Of course, we all know that the first quarter is a big deal, but man, let's look at that comparison. Do you think that speaks to you faster with the bar graph? Or would it speak to you faster, Priya, if I had the percentages here?
I think if I had this as well as the percentage, and I want to convey both at the same time, you know,
So,
you might,
like, what do you
like
think?
I want to show them that, you know, the relative proportion, as well as tell them that the second quarter is equally important.
Okay, fair enough.
That's just me.
And I would say if we're looking at one thing at a time, if I want the fact that the second quarter sales are very important to just jump out at you, I would show you a bar graph without numbers.
Also on the chart, pie chart, if you wanted to emphasize the second quarter, can you just move it out like they have a special effect? So
Yeah.
people can-
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Good point. Advanced technique. Definitely. And if we wanted to show declining over time, we could use a line graph. Now, obviously, your audience can look at it and see it just based on the bar graph, but we make it that much more obvious to our audience. Our conclusion is declining sales over the course of the year. That's what we need to address today. I'm going to use a line graph. In terms of how we would present these graphs, I have a method I call the take method to presenting a graph. Often, when you're presenting a technical presentation and you get to the graph, it's so tempting to get into the technical details of that graph very, very quickly. It's so tempting to tell people about all the interesting work that you did and to get into the nuances of it. But I recommend you slow down and overview the graph in a slightly different way, because this is the first time your audience is hearing the graph, and I like this method I call the take method. First, I recommend you go over the title, then I recommend you explain the axes, then I recommend you say the key takeaway, then I recommend you elaborate on the nuances. Now, I think your audience is going to do all of these things, whether you take them through it or not, because as you present a graph, your audience needs to read the title. They need to understand where on the axes. Is it years? Is it profit levels? And then they're going to be looking for the key takeaways. But if you try to explain, get straight into the elaboration, this last point, while your audience is still trying to process these three, then we're going to create some sort of competition between you and your graph, which we do not want to create. We want you to be guiding your audience to the important points in your graph. And I recommend you take a breath, go slowly, start with the title, explain the axes, say the key takeaway, and once you've done all that, then get into some of the nuances. For example, if I were to present this graph, I would say, here's a graph on our sales. Around the axes, you can see we have the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter. The key takeaway on this data is that our first quarter sales are the overwhelming amount of our sales, and they are more than half for the year. Now there's some further points I want to elaborate on. We've got some declining sales things that we need to talk about, and we also have a key opportunity in the second quarter where we have a big chunk of sales. That's how I recommend you go through a graph. Gives your audience a chance to absorb it before you jump into the finer points. Take method. Very, very powerful. I developed this technique while I was working with energy analysts to present all this complicated statistical data to determine how someone, an investor in the energy market, might be manipulating the energy market. These were smart folks. They threw so much technical stuff at me. And And I developed this technique. So let's just slow down. Tell me the title before you tell me about all these chi statistic something that's going to confuse me. Let's move on. Oh, question?
Yeah, would you ever have or want to use a slightly more specific title than just sales? Could you read, first quarter dominance and then look at the pie chart and say, wow, look at it, it is the most,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just trying to keep it simple. And to the discussion we had earlier, you could have the conclusion be the title of the graph. You could have the topic being the title of the graph. And you'd want to weigh some of those factors that we talked about earlier in the class. So let's move on to jargon. I've added to jargon. Not only is a technical expert tempted to use jargon, you also might be tempted to use what I call an expert understanding, which means it's not technically jargon, it's not a term that people won't understand, but it's something that you understand because of your familiarity with the industry. So it's not a word that's confusing, it's just something or a way you're using it. So jargon is, what are jargon? Give me some examples of jargon. Jargon you've heard, presentations you've heard, jargon you used unknowingly. What sort of things have you heard in a presentation where you're like, whoa, what's going on here? What is that?
Let's give an example. A lot of times with like the second years, when we're talking to the first years, especially during orientation, we start picking up a lot of language like, what's your elevator pitch? Blah, blah, B school, and they haven't oriented it yet to sort of do this in business school. So a lot of times when we sort of stare at people like elevator pitch, that's an example of jargon.
Yes, fantastic. So your audience doesn't understand the term. You're not talking about complicated stuff, but yet you are obscuring the meaning and confusing your audience because you're using terms that they don't understand. Obscure meaning, distracts your audience, lacks strength, unknown equals unimportant. If your audience doesn't understand what you're talking about, they're not going to say, wow, I have no idea what you're talking about. It must be really important. I'm going to go home and think about it. They're probably going to forget about it. So we don't want to use jargon. We want to eliminate it. Not only terms like elevator pitch or flex program or chi-squared. We also want to avoid using things that are simple words, but we understand them in a certain context that our audience does not. Have a strategy experience.
So doesn't it depend again who you are actually speaking to? I mean, if you're speaking to an audience that is very familiar with the subject, I mean, you might as well want it. Otherwise, it might portray that you are actually not an expert or you don't have a good handle on the topic.
Yes.
So it really depends. I think personally who your audience is.
Yes, absolutely. Remember we talked about in the first class, the only standard for whether or not you give a good presentation is how well it is received by your audience. So it doesn't matter that you are or are not using the right terms, it matters how your audience understands those terms. So sometimes you can use jargon, sometimes you don't want to use jargon. We talked about an IT person who might have the ability to translate things to a lay audience, and I said that person is golden, that person is extremely valuable. But if that same IT person is talking to other IT people, then she or he can talk in a slightly different language. So my strategy for this is my triple E jargon elimination strategy. Step 1, you expose the jargon. Step 2, you eliminate or you explain the jargon. Now expose just means think about what in your presentation is jargon. And to Priya's point, that is going to vary. Maybe it's going to be a bunch of people who understand that term, and if they do, then fine, use it. But if it's going to be people who don't understand that term, then think about eliminating it or explaining it. This could be as simple as you just going through your presentation, thinking to yourself, did I know this term before I got into this industry? Maybe you can talk to your roommate, your colleague, person in the next cubicle. Hey, do you know what flex program means? Hey, do you know what chi-squared means? And if they say no, you may have exposed that as jargon. Eliminate it if you can, or if you need to, think about explaining it. Maybe there's a key term that your audience must understand. Like, you must understand elevator pitch before we go forward in this conversation. So let me spend 30 seconds explaining elevator pitch to you. All right, now let's move forward in this conversation. So I've got an example that I want to go through. This is a sports example, and it contains some jargon. The thing I like about sports examples is ultimately it's fairly simple stuff. But to people who know the sport, love the sport, they will often talk in a very complex way that contains lots of jargon. So I'm going to take you through this sports example. It's a basketball game that happened a couple years ago. I'm going to throw some jargon at you, and then I'm going to ask you to break it down. Tell me where the jargon is, expose it, think about how we can eliminate it, or think about what we might need to explain. So do we have any basketball fans in the room? All right, a couple basketball fans who can guide us through this exercise. So let me start by just reading you these points, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to take them one at a time, say, where's the jargon, what can we do with it? So this is an example of a game that happened, Miami Heat versus the Brooklyn Nets in 2014. So let me just read these to you one at a time, and then we'll come back. So on April 8th, 2014, Miami hosted Brooklyn in one of the last games of the regular season. April 8th, 2014, Miami hosted Brooklyn. Brooklyn had won all 3 previous regular season games. Miami initially used size advantage to attack the paint. Miami's LeBron James and Chris Bosh both got into foul trouble early in the third quarter and relied more on perimeter shooting. Miami's James and Bosh combined were 0 of 7 in three-point attempts. With the inside threat removed, Brooklyn's Mason Plumlee guarded Miami's LeBron James aggressively and blocked LeBron's would have been game-winning shot with 2.1 seconds remaining in the game. Brooklyn won 88-87. So that's the information. Let's back up. Let's think about where the jargon is. How can we explain it? How can we eliminate it or explain it if we need to? Now keep in mind, not only jargon, but what I'm calling expert understanding. Things that you know because you're a basketball fan and someone else wouldn't know. Let's take a look at the first one. On April 8th, 2014, Miami hosted Brooklyn, won the last games of the regular season. Is there jargon or expert understanding there? And if so, how do we need to address it, Jerry?
Regular season
Yeah, regular season. What's the regular season?
for 82 games,
Yeah, first part of the game. What happens after the regular season?
playoffs.
The playoffs. So if we're at the end of the regular season, we're getting to a very important part of the actual season, which is the playoffs. So what happens? There's some anticipation for the playoffs. People are all excited. Are we going to get into the playoffs? Are we going to win? Brooklyn had won all 3 previous regular season games. Anything going on there? Yeah.
I think you need a little background knowledge about how many such games you don't know if you won 4 out of 7, so you'll move forward. So you can say, oh, I won 3. This game will be important.
Okay, good. All right, good. So Yang is interesting. She's demonstrating just enough knowledge to be dangerous, but she's actually missing something. Jerry?
That she's referring to the playoffs. This is the playoffs.
Yeah, she's talking about the playoffs, what happens in the playoffs. This is actually the regular season. So what might be going on with the regular season? If you've won all 3 regular season games and you're getting ready for the playoffs, what might the fact that Brooklyn won the 3 previous games have to do with this? What's that?
Is there something with the location in the playoffs?
It might be. It could be. So the team that wins more might have an advantage of the location. I'm not sure about that. What else might be going on? Momentum? No? You're going to go into the playoffs against a team that beat you 3 times in the regular season, and if they're going to beat you a 4th time in the regular season, how well do you think you're going to fare against them in the playoffs? Probably not so well. And this is Miami hosting Brooklyn. So Miami's home court. Is that an important factor we need to bring to our audience's attention? So this is in Miami's home court. They got beat 3 times by Brooklyn, and they're about to get beat a 4th time, and we're getting ready for the playoffs and trying to build up some momentum. And we're the Miami Heat. Anyone want to explain how that factors into this?
Was it the previous champion?
What's that?
Was it the previous year champion?
I forget. Were they? Does anyone know? Was this is this before they actually won? They'd never won?
I think they won.
They won the previous year. And then the question is, are they going to be, is LeBron going to be able to lead his team to another one? All right, so this Miami Heat, I think the jargon or expert understanding is this is a group of stars that came together for which there are very high expectations. And they're getting their butts kicked 3 times in the previous games from Brooklyn. And can they even perform on their own floor as they get ready for the playoffs? All right, so let's get into what actually happened during the game. Miami initially used size advantage to attack the paint. What's going on there? Any jargon there that we need to explain or eliminate?
Size advantage.
Okay, somebody raise it. Eric.
Depends.
Yeah, what do you know what that means?
I know.
You do? Okay, can you explain it?
It's you are able to attack from the under the basket.
Okay, it's the area under the basket. So what does it mean? The paint is the area under the basket. But what do I mean when someone says I'm attacking the paint?
You're playing really aggressively, so you have circulate, okay, guys,
Okay, and dunking and layups, and those would be close range shots, and it tends to be more aggressive play in that close range.
Although the dunking and layups is also jogging.
Oh, very good. So instead of dunking and layups, let's say close range shots. All right, so they're using close range shots, and if you're using close range shots, this size advantage is helpful to you. Then what happened? Miami's LeBron James and Chris Bosh both got into foul trouble early in the 3rd quarter and relied more on perimeter shooting. What's happened there? Yeah, foul trouble. What is foul trouble? Anyone know what foul trouble is? Yeah.
If I remember correctly, is everybody got 5 or 6 fouls? 6 fouls? If you are already on 5th one, you'll be very careful because you want to be able to still play for the whole game, so you'll be more conservative.
Yes. So if you get 6 fouls, you're out of the game. So that's just the definition of foul trouble or how fouls work. But you brought up a second important point, is if you get 5 fouls, then you have to play in a different style. You have to be careful because you're that much closer to getting thrown out of the game. So what if you get into foul trouble early in the 3rd quarter? How does that change the game? You as the expert in basketball, how are you going to explain that to a lay audience?
So you will try to avoid the person coming touch or contact.
Yes, you try to avoid that personal contact. You might have to play less aggressively. Vanessa just told us that they relied on this aggressive, close, short-range baskets. So they had to change their whole strategy because they got in foul trouble. Now, early in the 3rd quarter, is that a big deal, little deal? It's a huge deal. So early in the 3rd quarter means you have almost half the game left, and your 2 stars are already in trouble. So it drastically affects the game. So they changed their strategy. Miami and Bosh combined were 0 of 7 in 3-point attempts. What's the jargon there? And how it might be important to the point we're trying to make or the conclusion we're trying to draw, Jared?
3-point attempts.
Okay. Yeah, so what are 3-point attempts?
Just you're shooting at the hoop line,
Yes.
and if it's 0 to 7, that means that they don't have the ability to shoot from far away.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So 3-point attempts are long-range shots, and in the paint is close-range shots. So they had to switch to long-range shots, and how'd they do once they switched to long-range shots? Not so good. The 2 stars missed the 2.
I still don't get what 0 of 7 means. It means they missed all 7 shots.
Good. Another point of jargon or expert understanding we overlooked that Levy is pointing out. 0-7 means they missed all 7 shots. two of them combined took 7 attempts from 3-point range, and they missed them all. With the inside threat removed, Brooklyn's Mason Plumlee guarded LeBron James aggressively and blocked LeBron's would-have-been game-winning shot with 2.1 seconds remaining in the game. Any jargon or expert understanding we need to explain there? That's pretty straightforward. You see what happened. But there, I think, are some nuances in expert understanding that we could point out. Anyone want to take a crack at it? And I'll give you a hint of where I'm going with this. Who is LeBron James and who is Mason Plumlee?
Well, I was gonna say, I guess, I don't know exactly your point, but why the removal of the inside threat allows Mason Plumlee to guard him aggressively?
Okay. Do you want to explain that, or is there a question?
No, I mean, I can try to explain, but I guess because he doesn't have to worry about LeBron James going to the paint, he can worry only exclusively about those outside shots and be very close on him.
Yes, so it changes the way that Brooklyn could guard. Right? You don't have to worry about them trying to be aggressive and go for the short range shot, so you can get closer, you can get right up in their face. Let me take that a step further. Again, who is Mason Plumlee and who is LeBron James? Have you heard the name LeBron James before? So is he like an average player, not so good player, best player in the world? He's the best player in the world, right? Okay. And does anyone know who Mason Plumlee is? He's some punk kid from Duke who was a rookie in 2014. And some rookie from Duke was able to get right in the face, to Josh's point, of the best player in the world and block his would-have-been game-winning shot. Anyone ever seen a basketball player block their shot, and the crowd goes wild, everybody gets excited? On Miami's home turf, some punk kid from Duke smacks the ball away from the best player in the world. Could have some momentum effects. Could really be an interesting summation of the story of this game. And Brooklyn won 88-78. So Brooklyn won, an important detail. So let's present this instead of with the jargon. Let's do it in clearer terms that our audience can appreciate and understand. So I might hit you with a conclusion right off the bat because I have your attention, and I might say Brooklyn won by limiting and overcoming Miami's offense, and thus Brooklyn increased momentum. That's the conclusion. Let me explain to you how that happened. Well, first, Miami's star players successfully used size advantage to score close range shots. And then something happened. Foul trouble. Now, I think foul trouble is a key point. I need to explain what foul trouble is, not only the mechanics of what it is, but how it changes the game. I'm going to stop and explain that to you before we move on. You're going to understand foul trouble, and then I'm going to say Miami changed their strategy because of foul trouble, and it's very important to note that they were unsuccessful in this strategy change. One more piece I need to introduce before I get to the conclusion. And I want to tell you that Brooklyn held the series momentum as the playoffs drew near. All that is going to support our conclusion that Brooklyn won by limiting and overcoming Miami's offense and thus increased momentum. Is that a clear way to explain what happened in this game? The most anyone can understand? Lacks jargon? Still has some punch, some effectiveness? Any questions or comments on this? Yes,
But I feel like sometimes when people using jargon, there's like excitement with it. Like we take it away, just plain language will lose the excitement.
Okay, sure. And I think foul trouble might be one of those. Like foul trouble, the third quarter, and how it factors into LeBron James, the best player in the world, getting punked by Mason Plumlee and have his shot blocked. That's to your point, maybe that's one place. There are definitely other points. You could have explained attack the paint. But if you're using attack the paint with a lot of enthusiasm, it may sound exciting, but if your audience has no idea what you're talking about, you're going to have to bridge that gap somehow. Okay. Content enhancements. Let's fire through this last part. I mentioned there are some things you can do to spruce up your presentation. I just want to throw them out, discuss them. They don't necessarily have to be for technical presentations, but there's some things you can think about for your presentations that you will be doing next week. We will structure this conversation around the beginning, middle, and end, and think about some things you can throw in to spruce up this technical presentation you prepare for next week at each of those points. Let's start with the beginning. We know that this is a memorable moment to grab someone's attention. So let's talk about some of the tactics we can use to capture that attention. We might start with a startling statement. Did you know that 90% of the people outlive their retirement savings? 90%. We need to get you to be one of that 10%. Or we need to fix this problem, because I'm a politician. You might start with a short little anecdote, short little story. What else? What else might we do to spruce up the beginning of our presentation? Quotation. Teddy Roosevelt used to say, X, yada, 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 yada. The late, great so-and-so used to say about the music industry. It's not what you know, yada, yada. Some quotation that may prove your point. Question? Let's see. What's an intriguing question I can start off with that would perhaps give you an idea of my presentation, give you an idea of my conclusion? Do any of you know how many rats there are in New York City? And I might tell you, there are 40 million rats in New York City. You might say, oh my God. We've got a problem. We need to address this. All right, so there's some ideas. You might start off your presentation with next week to get us intrigued. Let's see, middle, as you're getting into exploring or stating your conclusion, you're definitely going to give us some facts. We want to know that you're talking about something that is real and supported by facts. Obviously, we need to hear your opinion. Not necessarily, obviously, but we do want to hear your opinion because you're the expert. We want you to make sense of these facts for us. Maybe you can tell us a joke. Maybe you can make some of these facts funny. Maybe you can tell us a longer story. Notice at the beginning, for the beginning tactic, I said anecdote. Anecdote is a short story, just a short little, this happened on my way upstairs. Somebody said, man, why can't you be more polite? And I'm a communications professor. So let me tell you about my content. A story might be a more in-depth story about me having bad communication skills. And some examples. When you're doing your presentation next week, you may give us some examples. As we get to the end, we know that this is a memorable point when we can reinforce our important conclusions, our important takeaways. Here are a couple of the tactics you might use. Signal the ending. Okay? So if you do not signal the ending, why would I say? Why do I want you to signal the ending? Do I, Natalie?
So people can begin to start paying attention again?
Yes, of course. If you do not remind your audience that you're about to get to the end, then you're going to lose that upswing on the graph of attention, retention, freedom.
I think also the key takeaway that you're going to mention at the end, they'll know that it's coming up, that I'm going to walk away from this room.
Yes, so signal the ending because they know you're going to reiterate the key takeaway. Restate that main point, key takeaway, refer back to the opening. So at the beginning, I told you 90% of people outlive their retirement savings. And I've shown you several ways how you can not be that 90%. Complete the circle going forward. So let me show you this vivid, positive picture of you being that 10%, what your life could look like. Isn't it great? So please come and give me your check. Next steps. You've got the audience. I've seen a lot of speakers do a great job explaining something to the audience, get them excited, and then waste that opportunity to encourage next steps. Now, salespeople almost always do it. Just the silly example I gave. I've explained to you retirement savings. I've explained to you a vivid, positive picture of what your life can look like. So let's do this right now. Or let's get on our website. Look at my plan for this. Do something because now I have your attention. Don't waste an opportunity to explain next steps. And Any additions, any comments on that? Okay. All right, so let's do two things. Let's do a number of things. First, let's talk about your technical presentations that are going to be due next week. Then, let's take a break / take 20 minutes or so to get with your group and think about how you want to do your team presentations, incorporating any of this stuff and finalizing any details, and then we'll do them. So, first, let's talk about technical presentations next week. All right, so you can look on page 7 of the syllabus. I've got a rubric, a lot of these things that I went over in class. I'd like you to, actually before I get to the rubric, what do I say? I want you to create a presentation, 5 to 7 minutes in length, approximately 10 to 15 PowerPoint slides. Yada, yada, yada. I've got a list of things on the rubric I want you to include, most of which we went over. Think about a good template design, customize the template with a header footer, use some powerful headings, insert a picture. Who asked me if I liked pictures? Yes, I like pictures. Insert a picture. Use entrance effects, use transitions, use the triple L transition strategy, come up with a powerful opening, a powerful closing, think of some thoughtful content, and an overall organizational pattern. Now this can be a presentation on anything of your choosing. I showed you an example of a resume PowerPoint slide a student did in previous class. You could present your resume as a PowerPoint slide. You could tell us about something you do for work. You could tell us about something that's important to you, just as long as you fit these elements in it. Find some data, make a graph. I've asked you to build a graph just for this presentation. Don't paste a graph in from somewhere. Actually insert the data, play with the bar chart, pie chart, see what works best for your presentation conclusion. Any topic of your choosing. Does anyone want to ask about topics? Is this a good idea, not a good idea? Yes?
But the graph you're talking about, not every topic would need a graph to represent it, right? How strict are you about the graph?
I am strict about the graph, and it's worth 3 points. If you don't have a graph, you don't get 3 points. So that's the short answer to your question. I feel like you could choose a subject that needs a graph. I might take slight issue with your point that we could do a thought experiment right now. You could give me an example of something, and I bet I or someone else in the room could come up with a rebuttal and say, well, what if you had a pie chart that showed this?
Let's say the resume or presentation.
Yeah. Yeah.
What kind of graph can you envision showing for the resume?
You could have increasing levels of management. So when I started my career, I was managing one person. Now I'm managing 3 people, so an upward trend. You could have the amount of revenue I'm generating for my company. You could have a number of skills. You could have a pie chart showing this is, more than half of my jobs have involved management skills. A small slice of the pie has involved quantitative skills. You might have to be a little, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not strictly quantitative, it's more abstract in the way you construct it, but still, it's something that visually informs your audience. Okay, other questions?
About any topic, so if you have you research something and then present it, or
Yeah, absolutely. You can research anything and present it. I suspect it would be something that you're somewhat familiar with. I'm not going to require you to research a topic that you know nothing about and start from scratch. Something that interests you. And I do ask that you make it an original presentation. You may have given a presentation on a topic similar. Please do not use those slides. Use brand new slides that you create yourself and PowerPoint slides that you create specifically and a graph you create specifically for this presentation.
This question is just in general. How many slides do you think is a good amount for your typical presentation? Like I've heard people say like
what is a good rule of thumb?
Like 30 minutes.
A 30-minute presentation. I would say as many as you need. If you're talking about a lot of technical things, you might need 50 or 100 slides. If you have that many slides, you might need a system where you can get through them quickly. In the presentation I just gave, notice that some of them were repetitive. They were different. They were the same slide but presented a different way. So you might click through those fast. You're presenting a lot of dense information and you have 100 slides with a different thing on all of them. Your audience is just going to be like, oh my God. Less is generally more. Helen?
I want to say, because the presentation time is very limited and you can pick some very important things to present to the audience. And if the audience cannot understand, and you can put the data to the appendix instead of the slides you want to do that.
Great point. If you feel like you have too many slides, you can put some of them in the, or some of the data in the appendix, and you can refer to them if you get questions. So you might have, in a 30-minute presentation, you might have 20 slides that are your core slides, and if you get questions on specific details, you could use Helen's strategy of referring to the data in those slides. But it, yeah, I'll tell you if you have too many, I'll tell you if you don't have enough. Other questions? Okay, great. So then let's talk about the logistics of how this presentation is going to work, because I made an adjustment due to our snow day. So in terms of the grading, I will grade you based on this rubric, based on your PowerPoint. I will click through your PowerPoint and check, did you do this, did you do this, did you do this? If you did all those things, you get 20 points. Your actual presentation, where you physically, verbally give it to the class, will not count on your grade. That's just for your benefit, your chance to practice. So having said that, I would like to do at least a couple presentations next week. And then we will not only do presentations next week, but we will also do whatever our topic is. I think it's emails. So we'll do a couple presentations just so we can look and we can think, is that too many slides? Is that too little? Did the speaker use the transitions? Was there jargon? Just a chance to ingrain some of the stuff. And then we will quickly move on to emails, memos, text message, social media. And you actually have a case. Yeah, I want you to read the Dell case and be prepared for that discussion.
So next week.
Next week. So there's a lot next week. So how I'd like to do it is I'd like to get 2 volunteers to actually do their presentations next week. And those 2 people can do their presentation and we can discuss it just like I talked about to reinforce these ideas. Everyone else, you can submit your presentation. You don't have to submit it next week because I know there's a lot with this change. You can submit it sometime between now and the end of the quarter. And in terms of actually presenting it, we will fit it in at the end of other classes, or you can find me, we can do it during office hours, or your 4th option is to just not present. You just want to submit the PowerPoint and not actually do the physical verbal presentation. That's an option for you. I'm not going to pretend that's not an option, it's just a reality of scheduling. So, if maybe I get 2 volunteers of people who actually want to do their presentation next week, Helen, and who else? Yeah.
Present the topic on the page 6.
On the PowerPoint.
This one?
Yeah. The technical presentation. So you'll have your PowerPoint slides, you will submit them on Blackboard, I'll pull it up for you and you'll stand up and you'll give your 5 to 7 minute presentation and we'll talk about all the things we talked about in class today. Anyone else besides Helen would like to? I understand, you don't want to get yourself in over your head. But keep in mind, if you don't volunteer now, you may not get this opportunity. All right, Yang. Okay. All right. So Helen and Yang will present technical presentations. Everyone else, submit it whenever you can. And if you want to actually do it, then we can do it at the end of other classes, or we can do it during office hours. So let's let's take 20 minutes, but a firm 20 minutes. At 3:10, take a little break, get refreshed, meet with your team, and put your team graph presentation on a file that I can come around with a thumb drive and copy, and then we will start with the first group at 3:11. All right. See you in 20 minutes.
Yeah, this is what makes it matter, yeah.
Can I see this one?
Sorry?
Okay, we can go back.
Sure. Do you want to present it next week, or just?
I don't want to present it, because then
Okay.
I just want to make sure that my format is
Okay. Yes, you can just email it to me. Don't submit it over Blackberry, because I might get it great, but just email it to me and say, this is that.
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you. I'll just get a soda and be back.
I don't know why. I couldn't find the places of thinking of Blackboard.
We want,
Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to.
They didn't. They just-
Email it to me.
Yeah, but just before class.
You know, it's not late. Kind of take whatever you need to do, or take whatever time you need to do. Yeah, but can you submit it over Blackboard?
Usually can. Usually there's like assignments. I'll ask other guys that kind of do.
If you need a couple days to figure it out, don't worry. But just when it's all there, I can give you your feedback and go directly into Gradebook, and it's all there.
I'll find that out.
Okay.
so funny. I really appreciate that. So, thank you. Thank you. I had to take a peek at those. I didn't realize they were uploaded already.
Yeah, I see you were very excited.
Oh, that's really nice. Thank you. Bolstered my confidence a little bit. What's your name again?
Natalie.
Natalie. Are you Flex?
How about you?
Full time. We usually don't get to see you guys unless it's nighttime, night
I
class.
think it comes after you ask me the question.
Really? With Goldman? See, that's how you know I didn't show up too much. Alright, so. Is that your baby?
No, my niece.
Oh.
Why are these things blowing cold air?
Yeah, they keep you awake.
Maybe it comes from the outside. Oh, yeah, it's a little AC going.
Just ask a quick question. Just looking at the slide, and I find it a good slide. Yeah.
Oh, it might be a little slow when you get it up on the button.
Oh, it's so slow.